Historically.
Right.
Historically,
the people who
they have a debt.
Contributing to farming, historically they have a debt to pay.
Yes, the land, they occupied the land illegally. They seized the land from our people.
Look.
And therefore, the process of reform, land reform, involved their having to hand over the land.
But
not at
they're being
all.
hounded off their land.
Not of their land.
It's not theirs.
Our land.
Even though they...
Who can forget the time? The Hondo Yaminda jingles on TV. I mean, listen to this. Or this. The headlines in the media. This was big news, even on international TV channels. It was a big issue for a lot of world leaders. We may not have known it then, but we were witnessing history. But what was this all about? Was it all about party politics and elections? Was it a war between races? Or was it just about Comrade Chinks and Tambawoga, Rambai Makashinga, and their catchy songs on TV and radio? What has happened since then, and where are we now? Well, it was all this, but was a lot more.
The state of the nation.
First, let's take a quick journey back into time, into history, where it all started. 1893, the Anglo-Matabele War of Matabeleland gave birth to the first reserves of 1894, namely Gwai and Shangani, described by the British Deputy Commissioner Richard Martin in 1897 as badly watered, sandy and unfit for settlement. You're going to have to keep up. 1930, the land apportionment in southern Rhodesia made it illegal for Africans to purchase land outside of established native lands. The African population was slightly above 1 million, while the Europeans were less than 50,000, however, receiving 51% of the land, while the Africans got only 29.8%. What does this do? It's one of the first laws to establish land segregation legally through race. White people at the time are about 5% of the population, but they get most of the better land. Blacks were pushed out to dry, rocky lands, which we still call maruzeva, from reserves. Land became the main rallying point of the liberation struggle. Political parties are formed and the second Chimurenga starts. 1980, independence comes in. A lot of black people obviously expect that they will get their land back immediately. After all, this is why we went to war, right? But it's not that easy. There is a negotiated settlement at the end of the war, the Lancaster House Agreement. What does it say about land? The new government cannot draft legislation to compulsorily take land for the next 10 years. The only way they can resettle landless black people is by buying land from whites who want to sell. Willing buyer, willing seller. But few white farmers did sell. Up until the 1990s, less than 1 million hectares of land was given up for resettlement. Only about 20,000 families had been resettled. This wasn't even good land. This is what the Human Rights Watch said at the time. Only 19% of the almost 3.5 million hectares of resettled land was considered prime or farmable. 75% of the best land was still in the hands of about 4,500 white farmers. So there was a lot of anger. This was like 100 years worth of anger. In 1998, villagers in the Shoshe communal lands decided, you know what? We've had enough. We cannot stay on this rocky soil anymore. We know where our ancestral land is. Let's go take our land back. And they did just that. They walked 30 kilometers to take over farms near Marondera. This sparked a new phase of land reform. 2 years later, in 2000, the fast-track land reform program began. Chaotic, but we'll address it. White farmers were displaced from farms. They were replaced by new black farmers. So we entered a whole new era of land ownership. Was this big historic change going to go with no negative impact? No, it doesn't work like that. Like we said at the start, this was a whole big deal worldwide. It had never been done before. The reaction of the West was swift. It was tough. In 2001, the US enacted a law, the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, or ZIDERA. Behind all the big words in the law, it was a law to punish Zimbabwe's land reform. It said nobody should lend to Zimbabwe. In 2007, a group of white farmers went to a SADC tribunal to fight land reform. The tribunal ruled that land reform was illegal and farmers should give back the farms. A new version of Zidera came in 2018. This one said Zimbabwe must do what the SADC tribunal says, that is, to roll back the years of land reform. Nobody expects this to happen. Now, many people ask this question: was land reform a success? Did it fail? First, the whole point of land reform was to reverse land ownership from minority white to majority black. Do most people agree? Yes, they do. And that happened. Where 1% of the white farmers owned more than 50% of the land, now millions of black families are on the land. Number two, the battle to make those black farmers productive continues. Because we replaced experienced white farmers with mostly inexperienced black farmers, it was expected that production was going to suffer for a period. These new black farmers didn't have the sort of bank loans from big banks that made white farmers successful over the decades. New black farmers could also not sell goods to places like Europe. So the big task was to start the long process of making sure that those farmers were put on the land and worked for the country. The Presidential Input Scheme and Fumvudza made it possible that anyone on any land is household food sufficient. How is that going? According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the 2020-2021 season became the highest yielding after 37 years. The communal and resettled A1 farmers contributed 62% of Zimbabwe's maize in the last farming season. The trend was the same in 2019-2020 with 56%. Let's pick another sector, tobacco. This is the biggest foreign currency earner. Before land reform, less than 2,000 white farmers produced all the country's tobacco. Today, 130,000. That's the number of A1 and A2 farmers growing tobacco today. Of the new farmers who registered to grow tobacco this year, 756 are from the communal sector, 244 are A1 farmers, while 38 are small-scale commercial farmers. After the land reform, tobacco production fell from 260 million kilograms in 1998 to as low as 50 million kgs a decade later. Where are we now? Zimbabwe is now one of the main leaf tobacco growing countries in Africa, with 25.9% of Africa's 722,187 tons from a global tobacco leaf production of 6.3 million tons. Today, tobacco is on the rebound. In 2020, Zimbabwean farmers produced 220 million kilograms. That is the highest amount of tobacco since land reform started. It has taken black farmers many years, but it also took the white farmers many years with government support and funding to get to where they were. Now, let's deal with some of the big myths. Only chefs and top cronies benefited from land reform. False. Over 160,000 families benefited, and more land is still being distributed. Don't take our word for it. Independent scholars such as Ian Schoons did research on this, and his book busts the myth that only a few people benefited. Here's what the research found in Masvingo province, for example. 2/3 of people who got land in Masvingo were low-income Zimbabweans. There is a new crop of farmers now. They are daring to look outside traditional crops. Horticultural exports are on the rise. Our agricultural exports are beginning to recover. Old markets are being revived and new ones are being opened. Young people are moving into farming. They realize it's no longer an industry for old people or for white people. They're deploying new technologies on the farms. They're using apps to monitor their crops and connect with markets. Technology companies like Precision Aerial Group has been working with cooperatives and government agencies, training drone pilots and also providing services that focus on plant health assessment. Other pioneers like Fresh in a Box have come through with one of the biggest fresh produce apps that have allowed them to connect these new farmers with customers. Their model guarantees fresh produce is delivered to clients in less than 6 hours from the field. Umhlaba Greenfields has managed to see where demand is, train people and upscale year-round production of horticultural produce, partnering with many new farmers to grow crops on demand. Let's not forget Farm Hut. They're shortening the agriculture value chain for producers through tech and have been winning awards across the continent. This is all great, but the road ahead is still long. What do we need to do better? Number 1, sort out land tenure. Our farmers need to be secure on the farms. We need to make sure that the 99-year leases are bankable so that our farmers can be independent and raise their own money from banks. Number 2, build better infrastructure to support the farmers. We are seeing the biggest rollout of irrigation and dams in years. Marwanyati Dam in Buhera and Muchekeranwa in Macheke are just 2 of the big dams providing water to farmers. 12 other dams are in their final stages across the country. We need to see this sped up and expanded even more. Climate change is real, and our farmers can no longer rely on the rain alone. Number 3, reinvest in agricultural extension services. We have some of the best extension services on the continent. Let's get it to work. We're glad our Umtumeni are back on their bikes and do what they do best, supporting the farmers on the land. Agricultural colleges are being revitalized. The many partnerships that are happening between corporates, government and institutions of learning such as Zimplats and Gwebi College by establishing a milking parlor are happening everywhere. Number 4, clamp down on cell phone farmers. We are happy the land audit results will be out soon and land will be distributed fairly and into the right hands. Our yields need to increase, not cell phone bills. Number 5, to keep the promise. In 2020, government signed a $3.5 billion deal with white farmers for improvements on the land. If you ask me, that's the right step to normalize relations and move forward. Whatever you think about land reform, the reality is that land is now in black hands. The next Chimurenga is production and economic self-sustenance. It will take a long time, but nobody said it would be easy. Land reform is a reality. What we do with it next is what will determine its legacy for more centuries to come. For more stats, we have attached a PDF and a link. That is the state of the nation.